so bad. I mean, the world around us is getting better. Look at this, the numbers of people living in absolute poverty, down. Child labor, down. Under 5 mortality, down. Guinea worm, all but extinct. Teen births in the US, down. Homicide rates, down. Violent crime, down. Years of education, up. Global literacy, up. The world is getting better. And all we wanted in Gaza was just a small piece of that. Just a little bit of that world getting better. And when I looked around, at this point I had an academic appointment at Western University, University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. And as I was looking around, I couldn't really understand what it was that meant that I, as a public academic, wasn't working for the public benefit, wasn't working for the public good. Here's a quotation from The Economist that sums up very well what it is that's happening in the academic world, largely because of the budgetary shortfalls. And this, again, this is The Economist. This isn't some kind of left-leaning magazine or even a moderate magazine. The Economist is the mouthpiece of capitalism in the Western world, well, the rational mouthpiece of capitalism. Researchers have become intellectual mercenaries for product teams. They're there to solve immediate needs. And so it was that for my colleagues, and largely for me, we were always asked to help companies make new things, not that would benefit the people around us, not that would benefit us or our families, but rather that would increase the profits of these companies. A basic antibiotic that would prevent 10 million deaths probably wouldn't make as much money as Viagra did. Not dissing Viagra. but it's a disproportionate spend. And it's the basics. It's the basics where I wanted to focus my energy and time in Gaza. So I'm going to play a little game with you called Spot That Stethoscope, where we're going to take a look and see if we can find just the most basic tool, the stethoscope, in some of these scenes from Gaza. Do you mind unmuting the computer now? Just go for 1 second here. This is a 3D printer on the left-hand side. And this 3D printer on the left-hand side is the parent. It has printed the 3D printer on the right-hand side. When I looked at the problem of this stethoscope, it was immediately after I had left the 2012 war. These video shots that you just saw were from the 2014 war. But in 2012, basically, I was sitting there trying to treat patients along with my colleagues. There were, give or take, about 10 of us at any given time. And when a bombing would happen, we would be flooded with 50, 100, 150 patients all at once. And these patients, largely suffering from penetrating injuries, sharp things that go through their chests, let's say, or crushing injuries, big rocks that fall on them, these patients, they would need us to do something very simple, just listen to to their lungs and make sure that air is going to the right place. And instead of using the most basic tool, the stethoscope, so that we could listen to them, what we ended up having was the 10 of us sharing one stethoscope and making decisions more or less blind. I looked at technology like this. I had seen this photo before I had gone out there. And I knew that this technology was around. This is one of the first 3D printers that was made with an open source license. And of course, it was made to be self-replicating. And I thought, well, how can we turn this into something that we can use? How can we make this into something that is of utility to the poorest people or the least capable people, like the people in Gaza? This on the left is the first 3D printer in Gaza. First working one anyway. There was one that we eventually found when we started talking about this, but had never been turned on. And this printer printed this one, and about another, at this point, 100, 150, 200, something like this. We're not even sure exactly how many children and grandchildren this printer has, because they print themselves. And one of the best things about that culture is that they go and do their thing. And so what we did is we used these printers, and we said, okay, can we turn, at the time, 2014, engineering, technology, and skill into something useful? This is the first stethoscope. Stethoscope head. It's one of the parts, the most important part of the stethoscope in terms of acoustic quality, and that's the very first one that we printed. And it was terrible. That's okay. We printed the second one and iterated up, and it was pretty bad, but not terrible. And we kept going until we hit this. This is an acoustic attenuation frequency response curve. It's really irrelevant. But what is important here is that there's a line at the bottom that is red, and a line at the top that is black. The red line is our glia model, and the black line is the Littman Cardiology 3, which at the time was the most expensive and generally regarded to be the highest quality stethoscope on the market. And what we were able to prove with this study, which was eventually published, is that the glia stethoscope, everywhere the red is lower than the black, that means that it is outperforming the glia is outperforming the Littman. And everywhere where the black is lower than the red, right, here's a spot, right, there's a spot, then the Littman is outperforming the glia. We didn't power this study or hypothesize that the glia model was better, because we didn't think it would be. We just wondered if we could make a compromise that was small enough in the quality. We never expected that it would outperform the Littman. And I can't tell you that it has. What I can tell you is that it's definitely not inferior. It is, for all intents and purposes, the same quality as the Cardiology 3, despite the glia model costing $2.81 American, so let's call it $5 Canadian. And the Littman Cardiology 3 costs about $300. This is the most recent model. This is the version 2, which actually we're about to release tomorrow, so I guess you're probably among the first to really see it in its official form. And it's great. Thank you. It's produced in Canada in a place that has a medical device establishment license. That means that that factory is licensed by Health Canada to produce medical devices of Class 1. Stethoscope is a Class 1 device. And because we can produce it, because we've learned how to produce it at a high quality, with good quality assurance, that means that when we go to Gaza, we can also produce the same stethoscope with the same quality and make it work to the same level. Even if you could pay $1,000 per stethoscope in Gaza, you can't get them in. There, the stethoscopes are printed using solar power that we get from the sun, on printers that print each other from local materials, using plastic that's salvaged from the garbage. Gaza has just about a 100% plastic recycling rate. And we have achieved, I guess you could say, independence when it comes to stethoscopes. The tubes that hook it all together, by the way, are from Coca-Cola fountain machines. And we are very careful to do that, knowing full well that if it isn't in other ways, capitalism can be your friend. This here is a curve of the different kinds of hemoglobins that we all have. We all have this thing in our blood that binds different stuff. Oxyhemoglobin, meaning that it binds oxygen, and that's what gives us all life. Deoxyhemoglobin, meaning that that's the stuff that we're sending out as our detritus. And then the other two, methemoglobin and carboxyhemoglobin, I'll largely ignore for now. When we started thinking past the stethoscope, we started thinking about things like the pulse oximeter. The pulse oximeter is electric, electronic, and mechanical, and so it presented a really interesting problem for us. This was the very first version. I know the video's not, or the photo's not clear here. You guys are probably blocking your so sorry. But suffice it to say, version number 1 was terrible, of course. And version number 2 actually developed in Ottawa, so if anybody is here from the original development team, please forgive me. It was also pretty bad. But it was a step up, and an important part of that iteration. And then we kept going until we finally hit a model that worked really well on the bench at least. And then, of course, you have to test that. How do you test the pulse oximeter? This is an intensive care doctor who was much smarter before this experiment than after it. And these two numbers are important. This 66, for any of you who are involved in medicine, is the oxygen saturation of this particular gentleman. What we've done is we've taken this mask, we've completely sealed it off to the atmosphere, and we started flooding him with hypoxic mixtures of gas, which is to say, in common terms, we're suffocating him. His heart doesn't like it. That's the 120 that's in the corner. That means his heart's really pounding on his chest. But this is how you have to test a pulse oximeter. If any of you have ever had one of those things on your finger, they were tested on healthy volunteers exactly like this. By the way, I was volunteer/victim number 1, so I can tell you in no uncertain terms, I know it sounds bad, but it actually feels even worse. But we're recruiting volunteers, so if you'd like to join us. You are among the first people to see these curves. This is a curve of the oxyhemoglobin and the deoxyhemoglobin coming out of the machine. These are the recordings that we're making to make sure that the device works, and so it calibrates. And this is a more real-life way in which the machine works. You know, people cough, or they move, or they shake, or something. And so you want to know not just that the machine works in ideal conditions, but that in normal conditions it'll return back to ideal. It's working well. And this is what our current experiment is doing. As we progressively suffocate people, the machine's reading is changing. We're taking these readings and we're implementing them in a particular way. Okay, I mean, it's an awful lot of science, but I thought I'd just talk about the pulse oximeter for a moment. It's one of the up-and-coming ones. While we were working on all of this, we were approached by the disaster committee in Gaza with an idea. These numbers are approximate, don't quote me on them, but I'm sure we can get the exact numbers. In 2014, give or take, around 2,500 people were killed. Of those 2,500, around half of them died of exsanguination. That's a fancy term for they bled to death, from their arms or their legs usually. We would consider the other deaths not to be exsanguination as such. And of that half, at least half, took at least 30 minutes to die. I think all exsanguination deaths from the limbs should be salvageable, or should be treatable. And those deaths should be very, very few. But at the very least, the ones that took half an hour to die should have definitely not died. And so the disaster committee asked us to use our 3D printing technology that they've been hearing about on the street and to create tourniquets. This is the very first one that was printed. If any of you know anything about engineering or printing, it wasn't printed quite right, but that's okay. It was really just an initial prototype. And we printed more and more and more and started training, because of course it has to be part of a Stop Bleeding campaign in which you're training people and how to use them. This is in Gaza, and here basically they're taking paramedics, using the tourniquet and then cutting off their circulation. This is a commercial pulse oximeter, the thing that we were showing before, and they would train them by turning it until the pulse stopped to the finger. And while we're working on this, of course, taking our sweet old time, we ran.
At least 10 Palestinians were killed Friday in clashes with Israeli forces along the Gaza border. This violence erupted after thousands of Palestinians marched towards the border ahead of what was supposed to be a mass sit-in. According to reports, some protesters started throwing stones. The Palestinian Health Ministry says more than 1,000 people were injured in this incident. It was the deadliest day in Gaza since last fall.
That day, there were about 1,000 people injured, and these were war numbers. This child here was shot in the leg with what we believe is a new type of munition. We're not 100% sure exactly what's going on here, but the injuries are injuries that we haven't seen before in the emergencies. Everybody around him is a civilian. They have no idea what to do for this boy. And so they pick him up and they try to get him to help, what we call scoop and run. And as they do this, every moment that he's not being treated, every drop of blood that he loses brings him one step closer to losing his life and one step closer to death. Eventually, actually in this shot, you can see that there's no more blood dripping off of the bottom. If you were to see the video, he stops bleeding. He's lost that much blood. And unfortunately, this boy did end up with an amputation after many efforts and many surgeries to try to salvage this leg. This, on the other hand, is a patient who I saw and treated about a month after the other boy. His foot is not supposed to be doing that. It's kind of turned at this particular angle here. I don't know, you guys can tell me if you can't see this, but I guess probably the angle is better for you anyway. And what happened is that he shot just above the ankle. I was just outside of frame here and was probably on top of him in 20 seconds after I heard that gunshot. Wrapped his foot up, got him tourniqueted, and off we went. Now, I'm going to walk you through all the way with what it is that we experience when we have to deal with one of these gunshots. It starts not at our discretion or desire, but rather with the sniper. The sniper is the one who picks not just the target, but the moment at which everything starts. And so you can see that while the sniper's lining up his shot, who, oh, by the way, is a human being on the other side, it is a deeply intimate act. He has to pick the person and become one with them so that his rifle moves and predicts everything that the person on the other side, most of them boys or men, will be doing. And then, of course, the penultimate step, so that he can settle himself, will be to hold his breath on the altar while that person is just standing still. Target them and pull that trigger. That's when our work begins. That's when we start rushing to the person who's been shot. You'll see some white smoke. I know it's grainy footage. And that white smoke is tear gas, because we're getting gassed almost always as soon as the shot happens. And then as we're trying to, there's some gas there. What does it look like on the other side? 50. And you can see there the civilians are carrying him off because the paramedics in this particular case, this was from 14th May, are in the field. They can't afford to be carrying any people off. Let's take that bit by bit. The bullet hits 2 people. There's the primary victim, the secondary victim, and where the bullet hits, right there in blue. And when that happens, the paramedic over here is just starting to hear the shot. He probably hasn't heard it when this frame happens, but he's just hearing the shot. And he has to decide, as soon as he hears that shot, where he's going to go. He just starts running. You just start running, and then you figure it out later. Here, the paramedic has started running, and you can see from his line of sight that he's identified the primary victim, namely because he's on the ground. Secondary victim is still standing. That will always make him a secondary victim. And at this point, the paramedic and several other paramedics, as you'll see when you watch the video again, have rushed to the primary victim and have started to work on him. Civilians will line up around the victim to try to prevent a second shot and to present some privacy in case there's groin exposure or something like that. A volunteer paramedic, this one here, Roseanne, for example, was one of the volunteer paramedics. Volunteer paramedic is dealing with a secondary victim, and these 2 volunteer paramedics are about to redirect because they realize that the primary victim is cared for and the secondary victim needs care. There are 3 secondary paramedics there. Okay, I'm gonna watch that again. So here the paramedic is running. The other professional paramedics are going up there. The helper paramedics are now redirecting to the secondary victim. And then, of course, the patient will be extricated. This is a sniper tower here. There's another 2 sniper towers. It's this sniper tower on this side that shot these two protesters. And here again, they're being exfiltrated. This is what it looks like for us while we're usually trying to exfiltrate somebody. That's a tourniquet, one of the 3D printed tourniquets, and actually this one has broken. That's my hand that's on him trying to salvage the bleed after this tourniquet has broken, which we deployed way before we were ready to, so we ended up making some mistakes in the engineering on the field. And then this is the final step here as the people carrying the patient away are arriving to an ambulance. The ambulance will extract them first to a trauma stabilization point where you decide if they need immediate hospitalization or if they can wait a bit, and then off you go from there. That's what it looked like. Chaotic, sure, but our work was really careful and controlled. We knew exactly what was happening to our patients. These numbers are a little bit old. The Ministry of Health hasn't released a new updated one of these in a little bit. So these numbers are now up to about 30,000 injured. But about 60% of them, the odds are still the same. About 60% of them are shot in the lower limbs. About 15% of them are shot in the upper limbs, and then the rest are spread everywhere else. So we know that people are getting shot in the legs, which is very, very high risk of exsanguinating, dying from bleeding in the legs. And despite that, what we're seeing is that the training has worked really well. This is what we call JITT, just-in-time training, where we are taking the paramedics who we haven't been able to train ahead of time because it's somewhat of an emergency situation, and we're trying to teach them how to use tourniquets while they're in the field. In a sense, the best training program ever, because you teach them, they practice immediately, you can give them feedback right away. But of course, horrific conditions to be trying to do this training. And you can see that's the same doctor, one of the doctors from one of the paramedic services who's doing the training in both this and the home environment. This training and training like it has reduced the death rate to 0.2% for limb injuries, which is an incredibly good number. 0 is the best number, but insofar as it goes. The US military has numbers of about 7%, and in Canada our numbers are very close to about 7% for these sorts of limb gunshot injuries. So they have done a good job. Now, obviously there are some things that make it easier to treat these patients in Gaza than it would be in Canada. You know where and when almost everybody is going to be shot, and so you can be on top of them very, very quickly. The response time is phenomenal. So this is what the tourniquet looks like, the packaging that we give to the paramedics. And this is the first problem that we ran into, which was that the paramedics were reporting to us that there were problems with the tourniquets, and I, like any typical developer, didn't, or even engineer, didn't believe them until they started breaking in my own hand. And what we realized is that this was the problem. This top one was recovered because we were working this project. People knew, like, oh, these are the guys with the tourniquets. So the brown one here is blood from a patient, and somebody brought it back to me afterwards so that we could analyze why they were breaking. It was this thing right here, just a little too sharp, so when we were turning it, it was cutting. We fixed it with a, I want to say chamfer. I think it's a fillet. I don't know if there's any engineers in the room, they can tell me. But basically, we curved it so that it didn't do it, and it recovered quite well. Of course, there are costs to these sorts of things. You already heard a little bit about what happened to me. When this photo was taken, it was taken on May 11th, 2018, I was very annoyed. You can, this is not my smile. I don't smile very well anyway, I don't like photos. But this is my slightly pissed off look. And that's because here we were working on patients, trying to extract victims who were shot. And then this one dude is like, hey, doctor, come over here, I want to take a photo. Photo of what? Why? And he was quite insistent. I'd been working with this particular team for quite a while, and I sort of thought, okay, let's take this photo. I asked him afterward, his name was Whitman, I'm like, Whitman, why? Who gives a shit about this photo? And he says, well, you know, doctor, you just never know. And what I didn't know is that 4 days later, 4 people involved in this photo would be shot. This is Mohammed Maqdad. He was shot in the ankle, and I believe it's been amputated since. This is Mohammed, the photographer. He was shot as well on the 14th, one of the 19 people shot. And I was one of the people who was shot too. When I was shot, the person who rescued me was a man named Musa Hassanan. That's Musa. And it was really a wild experience that obviously I'm never going to forget. As soon as first I was standing there. You saw that most of the victims are just standing. That's because if you're a sniper and you're a 19-year-old or 20-year-old kid, you're probably lazy. You're not going to shoot things that are moving. You're going to shoot things that are still. And that's what we found too. Snipers, by and large, shot people who were not moving. So I was just standing there. I remember my friends and my family, they were like, oh, you must have been doing some really cool, like, Rambo shit. Like, no, I was not. I was just standing there like a chump, chatting with my colleagues, my paramedic colleagues, my friends. And then all of a sudden, I heard a bang to to my right. And that's usually the indication that somebody's been shot. So I thought to myself, somebody's been shot. And then I'm there looking at the sky, like, oh, I've been shot. And then the incredible and searing pain in which I realized that I've been shot in the legs. Of course, I say it now with much more like romantic stoicism. The reality is, before I even hit the ground, I think I was yelling, fuck. Loud. Which is probably how they knew that I had been shot. And my colleagues came to me, and the first among them was Musa. Musa saw me, and again, I don't know how many of you here are in the medical field, but as soon as he came over me, and he did what any good medical colleague would do when he sees you hurt. He mocked me. He's like, I should have been pantalon. How would you do those pants? Because of course now my pants had holes in them. They weren't even my pants. They were like London Health Sciences pants. And then the next thing he asked was, do we put a tourniquet on or not? And I knew, and he knew, that we had basically 8 tourniquets left in store. And that's because the store was on my back, and I had a constant count of them. And we hadn't even really gotten to the afternoon. The protests were supposed to start at 2 or 3, I think 2. And I was shot at about noon. And had I been in Canada, like, of course, this patient needs a tourniquet. But in that case, knowing what I knew, no way did I deserve a tourniquet. And if I were any other patient, I wouldn't have given that patient a tourniquet. In bad case. So I said no. And he wrapped me up with a lot of pressure, this pressure dressing, and off we went. And luckily I wasn't shot in any place that was going to kill me. Obviously, because I'm not dead. When I got home, my parents, of course, were dying to see me. It took a few weeks to get home after I was shot. I had told my mother, Dr. Sara, as you call her, I told her, she said, call me. Call me throughout the day. I said to her, no, Mom, if I call you, it's going to be because something bad happened. You're not going to hear from me until Maghrib or Isha, sunset or after, because I knew that there would be follow-up work too. And so I called her about 2.5 hours after I was shot, when I knew I was going to be okay. And as soon as I called her, she was like, something's wrong. I was like, no, I'm fine. But I've been shot. Obviously, I mean, some of you here are mothers, fathers. Even those of you who aren't can understand. And they were terrified until the moment they saw me. And when my mother saw me, that first time in their house in London, I came to their house to see them. She went to her knee and kissed my boob. I remind you, still a practicing doctor. And it was a fucking gunshot wound. But she kissed it because at that exact moment, there was nothing left to do. She was absolutely beside herself